Okay, welcome everybody back to Quality Advocates. It's great to have everybody on. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marco Pisano. I head up the QA and testing practice at Expertise Recruitment in London. Glad that we've got Lewis back on Quality Advocates. He was with us not too long ago, so delighted to have him back on for another talk. The talk will last about 30 to 35 minutes, and then Lewis will be taking your questions after that. As I said before, this will be recorded, so if you need to drop off sometime before the end, not a problem. I'll be uploading it to our YouTube page within a day or two after this, and I'll be posting that link onto my LinkedIn page, so keep your eyes peeled for that. In the meantime, if everyone can mute themselves, switch off their cameras, and I will quite literally hand it over to Lewis. Let me make you the host, and we're off.
Ooh. Okay, not sharing, present. Cool, so I'm going to talk to you today about tests as a first-class citizen and the journey we took at Cancer Research UK to go from very separate teams and end-to-end tests being driven by two separate parties and bringing that all together, and hopefully you guys will align with some of the things, the challenges that we have. Throughout the talk, if you have a question, just shout and I'll try to answer it for you. So a little bit about me. So I'm the QA automation lead at Cancer Research UK. I've been there for almost 2 years now. I'm also a course author, as I mentioned, on Udemy around contract testing, and also had the privilege of working with Andrew Jones on creating a course on Test Automation University, which is a really great resource if you haven't used it before. So I took this quote from the clean code, Robert C. Martin: "It is not enough for code to work." And that was the primary driver of us bringing our tests and our code together, because that was very much the mentality that was driven from the development process, and a very feature-heavy development as well, where we were pushing, especially at the start of the pandemic, we were very much pushing features to try and drive traffic to our site and try and drive interest in fundraising during a really difficult time. But it wasn't enough for the code just to work. We needed the tests to drive that implementation as well. So what we did is we rolled out a survey across all of the dev teams, the product teams. So we have projects as well, but we just ran it against the product teams, who are a stable set of teams across the CRUK domain. So we asked them a few different questions. We asked them about their skills in the different areas. We asked them their opinions on things, what challenges they're facing. But also we asked them very specific questions about when these things are occurring and what kind of testing they were doing. So in order to establish that, we had unit test reviews, whether that was being done by QAs and developers, whether they're doing 3 amigos, whether the acceptance tests are being run against each of the features. And as you can see, it's very bottom heavy. From the unit tests were not being reviewed by QAs. 3 amigos was happening on occasion, but not all the time. And features weren't being tested in production, which is a red flag to, again, about the feature development happening before testing were getting involved. So that was kind of a picture of what was happening at Cancer Research UK. And I found the State of Software Development report from 2020, which kind of mirrored what we were seeing about how people were measuring the performance. So we're talking about completed tasks. Is that a key metric of the quality that you're delivering? Working software, how are we defining working software in that metric is one question I have. But also, what does it mean to be working software? And code readability is crucial in that, and test coverage as well. Speed of developer is another primary thing that we see at Cancer Research as well, is around how much feature development is happening. So taken on from the survey that we ran, we came up with these steps of how we were going to implement testing and QA alongside development. So the first thing is location, putting the test and the code together. So the code lived on the same branch, the test code, but it was just on a branch. And so it never got merged in with master. So when development were pulling the code, they were never seeing those tests. The other thing that we're going to discuss is around terminology, understanding what these test terms mean and identifying whether there was a mismatch and aligning that across teams. The other thing was style. So how are you writing your tests and whether that aligns between development and QA. The design, things like page object model or app actions, which Cypress are endorsing now, which is the tool that we're using. And then mindset very much comes down to, you can do all the steps that you want. And I say here, these aren't all the steps that you need to do in order for tests to become a first-class citizen. But mindset is crucial in adopting testing from the start. So let me go through the steps one by one now. So putting the codes and tests together, as I mentioned, the tests very much lived in two separate places and they weren't visible between the two. And the thing with the location was that the tests were being run in a separate CI. So we had two separate Jenkins, one for the code deployment and one for the test deployment. And we had the devs and QA working in silos. So we very much wanted to bring them closer together. And what we are finding is that the separation caused issues in terms of not being aligned together. So what was being tested wasn't necessarily the same as what was being developed. And how can we make these teams work more closely together? So a couple of clear options of what we can do to bring the code together. We have a test folder, because when Cypress generates your instance of Cypress, it creates that Cypress folder for you. So we have that test folder. Also, we have component tests, which live side by side with the React components. And then we have some unit tests, which we put in a separate test folder, but they live alongside the code as well. So there's clearly more options, but these are the ones that we like. And just to give you a snapshot of the worlds apart that the dev and QA team were working in, the language we were using for our testing framework was Java. And that made up a huge proportion of our estate within CI UK, which is madness, because ultimately it was just test code, but it had a lot of boilerplate for any kind of behavior, any kind of interactions you wanted to do with using the web or API or database, any kind of interactions you wanted to do. So we have PHP applications, we have business applications written in C#, and we have now Node.js backends and React frontends. So we want to align much closer to the programming languages that our developers were using. And so when I joined, we were going through the transition already, but I just got on board with it, is getting the QAs to write JavaScript tests, and we chose Cypress in order to align closer and speak the same language. So step 2 was terminology. So when we were talking about end-to-end tests with developers, we weren't talking about the same thing. And when we talk about end-to-end, we're talking about that within a microservice architecture. And so it can get quite confusing about what you were testing at what time. So just a really trivial example to demonstrate the terminology and how it can be different. When we look at web pages nowadays, we see the magnifying glass, but we think of that as the search icon, whereas Sherlock Holmes wouldn't think of a magnifying glass as a search. He would think of it as a tool for him to investigate his murders. So let's relate that back to QA and testing. So QAs were calling end-to-end tests horizontal. And what I mean by horizontal is they were testing that full end-to-end journey. So if we take the fundraising page, they're making a donation, that donation hits the payment API, the payment then gets completed, and the donation then gets stored in our customer relation database. And we were testing that full journey in our end-to-end test. Whereas what devs were perceiving as end-to-end was vertical. Within their estate, once the donation had been made and it had been stored in their database, which demonstrates the fundraisers that have been made on that specific fundraising page, that's where their testing ended. So we needed to align these definitions. The other thing was integration. So again, when we're talking about the payment system and the end-to-end payment journey, where QAs are talking about that from a systems perspective. So when it goes to the integration environment, the system itself was what they were testing. Sorry, can Ahmad, can you go on mute, please? Ahmad, sorry. And then devs were talking about it from a very literal term, where we're talking about the integration between two components. And component testing also came into contention because we talk about React components, but also we talk about component testing, which is not a discussion I want to get into today. The other definition that we were talking about was performance. Performance obviously is a broad term that we use to describe multiple different types of performance testing, but when the term was being bandied around, people in QA were using it for their data testing, so generating large data sets and putting that through a system over a period of time, and then devs were using it to describe, not sure if stopwatch is the right term, if someone knows a better term for it, I'd gladly hear, is running a set of 100 API requests and making sure that it fit within a certain time period. So what we did is we discussed and we agreed to disagree on the definitions. And I think the definitions very much come down to your business context and your organization. So we agreed to disagree and came up with some other definitions. One being acceptance test, now to describe that vertical, horizontal, the vertical end-to-end tests, and then the end-to-end would stay as the full user journey. So moving on to step 3, we were talking about style. So in our Java framework using Selenium, we were using Cucumber on top of that to produce that BDD style, but we weren't writing BDD from the user's perspective. And so the benefits of that kind of got lost. We were referencing Excel data in our data-driven tests, and we were referencing very specific test implementations, which can get a bit clunky. The other thing that I think with BDD, and feel free to contest me on that, is developers don't necessarily like writing in BDD, they'd rather write native. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how we can do it. So traditionally, you see BDD in this feature-like format, whereby you have the scenario and the given when then. Often you'll see lots of thens and lots of ands, which is kind of an anti-pattern. I like the method of chaining objects in JavaScript, so you can create these objects and then you can chain your functions to them, so you can get this BDD style without having to use a framework like Cucumber. The other big elephant in the room is Cypress. So Cypress comes along and creates a brilliant tool that our developers really love, which is a huge contributor to bridging this gap between QA and dev, which is really great. And they have a very minimalist style, and they really encourage you to stick with that and try not to extract anything into functions, or try and keep things as reusable as possible. So the Cypress style is very readable, and so do stick with that. The other way is extracting it to functions, as I say, and putting those inside a page or a component and referencing it from there, which again makes it very human readable and make sure that you're keeping it consistent from the user's perspective again. On this, I'd be very grateful if people had ideas, post them in the chat, or yeah, bring them up at the end, because yeah, I'd love to hear about them and hear about your experiences. So we move on to step 4 now. So we're looking at the design. So I'm talking about page object and your app actions. So as I mentioned earlier about the Cucumber implementation, you have a beautiful picture in your mind that business analysts are going to write the BDD, and then the tester's going to implement them, or devs are going to plumb it in, and then you just run your tests and it all runs smoothly. But that often doesn't end up that way. So what I'd like you to do is go to menti.com on your mobile devices, on your computers, and answer a couple of questions that I have. So I'm going to change the screen you see now, but you can just go to menti.com and then use the code here at the top. Cool. So as you can see, people adding their preferred patterns, and Yeah, if you put other, can you put what you use in the chat? That would be super useful. Page objects is still very popular, it seems. We are trying to transition from page objects to app actions, just through the nice implementation that Cypher offers. It seems to be the right way to go. Not saying that page objects isn't a good solution, just saying. Cool. Yeah, as your template, I'd be interested to hear about that more. I'll have to give that a Google. Nice. Cool. So yeah, the other big topic that we have at Cancer Research, one of them is about upskilling the QAs on unit tests, but also just the code review stage, just being able to read the code and being able to understand what's going on. And it's more of the communication tool to be able to facilitate that chat you had at Three Amigos, coming back to the code review and saying, okay, we chatted about this test implementation. Is that actually what we implemented? And also checking that unit test coverage. Do we understand what tests we have at all the levels? A lot of the duplication we had, which again puts the devs off touching the end-to-end tests, is there's a lot of duplication between their unit or integration tests, and so they don't feel the need to kind of get involved in that. Cool. So yeah, dev seems to be the primary one. Be interested to hear why that is. But again, we don't really have time today. I love that some people have it as a team effort, though. That's really cool. I have lost my slides. Smooth transition. So coming back to the slides, once we've done those first 4 steps, we're in a great place to be able to talk to the developers and QAs and really try and dig into what the reason why we're not working together on the end-to-end tests. I've also worked in ASOS where we really endorsed TDD and really endorsed the CI build breaking. If the CI build breaks, then it's the person who broke its responsibility to fix any tests, or and that goes all the way down the chain, right up to your end-to-end tests. So when we talk about mindset, what do we mean? So again, from our survey that we ran within the company, we were seeing lack of experience with tech tools. We don't want to be that person that puts a hand up and says, I don't really know how this works. Please, can someone help me? It's not a comfortable feeling to be in. Another crucial one being don't have time, which again comes back to that pushing features rather than pushing quality. Lack of resources and support. That comes down to the kind of upskilling that I was talking about. Don't really have the time and the resources to dedicate to the individuals, and how do we change that from our company level? Environment or infrastructure issues. So that's the constant pain point we have with some of our legacy software, which can be flaky at times, and so that does very much put people off. But bringing the ability to run the test locally is hopefully going to bridge that gap. And the other thing is too much reliance on external dependencies. So it relates to the environmental issues, but when we're running our tests on the integrated environment, we're working in microservices, so we shouldn't have to worry about other external dependencies. Let's stop those or mock those out and build those into our test harnesses. So that was the survey that we ran, but again, in the State of Software Development report, it seems to be a similar perspective out in the community as well, is those budgets of getting the tools that you want, not needing it yet is a classic in the QA community of, oh, this is just a proof of concept. And we had that very much so in our recent past. You always need it now. You'll regret it later. Time to use again and time to research is fundamentally comes down to that. The business giving you time to dedicate to these things. So as I mentioned throughout, devs were very, very focused on features, writing unit tests if they possibly could, which often, or not often, sometimes wasn't the case due to just the way that the infrastructure was built or the legacy things that we were using. And then they would merge that onto a feature branch or merge that onto the integration environment. And then that's where QA would get involved, run their end-to-end tests. They were running nightly initially, but now I've brought them into GitHub Actions, exploratory testing, and involved in the sign-off of the release, which we don't want QA to do. It's a team responsibility. So the common questions that we're getting now we're further down the journey and devs are really writing much more of the tests, is when to stop testing. When have I written enough tests? And I think that's fundamentally where the QA and the devs input collaboration is crucial, is understanding what the risk is in the test that you've written, what coverage do you have, and what coverage are you happy with. And yeah, there is no right answer to this question, so you just have to deal with it, and our devs don't feel comfortable with that. So we flipped it around. So QA is getting much closer to the unit tests, starting with code reviewing and understanding what coverage we do have at the unit level, getting involved in the integrations, whether that be through, bear in mind this is at the front end side of things currently, because we're learning JavaScript, and so that's the transition we're making. And yeah, the integration, the React components, hopefully through contract testing. And then devs are focusing more on writing those Cypress tests for their front-end React components, shifting right, so caring much more about the monitoring that they're delivering on the feature, and building these tests into CI, so running them inside Docker containers inside the CI environment. So that's it for today. Hopefully some of these steps and things are coming up inside your organization. If they're not, I'd love to hear your success stories. And obviously these are not the only steps that you need, but very much focus on step 5, I would say, which is reversing that mindset of it's QA's responsibility. Cool. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, queries, statements? I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, hi, Louis.
Hi.
Yeah, just want to touch on the mindset aspect.
Yeah.
I think the mindset really depends on how your team works.
Mm.
I.e., if your team is cross-functional per se,
Yeah.
all individuals can get involved in all levels of testing, the unit integration end to end, as opposed to if your team is practicing some type of waterfall model.
Yeah.
Testers can only get involved at the latter stages of development. So it really depends, first and foremost, how your team works in order for you to actually practice the effectiveness of testing properly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I completely get where you're coming from. I think the perceptions, I've worked in Agile for a long time, but I think the perceptions of working in waterfall still apply in terms of the responsibility is still down to the team as a whole. And no matter when you get access to it or the feature is ready to be tested, it still comes down to what you're going to deliver to your customer, and quality should be at the forefront of that. So yeah, I still think within the waterfall process, you can still bring in a lot of this, these philosophies.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, that's Celine.
Hi.
I'm trying to understand. I'm a newbie, I can say, on automation, and I was using page objects with Java. And now I'm trying to understand there are Cypress with JavaScript I can use, and you said it's more convenient to use. I have seen other articles about this, and they said that it's vice versa. One question is this one. And also I checked about screenplay, and I'm in the very beginning of trying it. So what do you think about screenplay as well?
Yeah, good question. Really good questions. So it's definitely, you should definitely consider what the right tool is for your project. So Cypress is kind of hijacks the browser. So it's very heavy initial setup for your tests, but it does allow you to control the browser much tighter than your Selenium, for example. But yeah, there's a lot around this topic that would probably need another hour session. But yeah, I really love screenplay. I think it caters much closer to your user, and it's much easier to align coming from page objects.
So it's not an anti-pattern, but becoming like an anti-pattern.
The problem you get into with page objects, and there's nothing wrong with doing page objects if you implement it exactly how it's intended to be used. It's just that's never the case, and we know when we build software that we're always going to cut corners, and there's always going to be a rush at the end, as mentioned with the waterfall projects, but same in Agile. We just run mini waterfall. Yeah, so it's not that these patterns are better or worse than each other. It's just the case of what's easiest to follow and what helps you, enables you to do your job as best as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, unless someone wants to speak about it. So we have a question about transitioning from page objects to app actions. And the reason for this is, again, that the developers are writing a lot of the Cypress tests now, and they can much easier access the models of the application, and so they can interact with them during the test using app actions, whereas extracting that out into page objects just doesn't make sense. And also we're following the plain Cypress mentality, which is just keep everything inside your test. Don't worry about duplication. Just keep your tests clean and tidy, and the rest will come out in the wash, as they say. So yeah, app actions for us is just about aligning much closer to the development process, and the page objects was just slowing us down. And we have a question about transitioning from Java to JavaScript and planning to rewrite the entire set. How did you get buy-in from the test team? So we are planning to rewrite the entire set over time, but obviously this is a gradual process and it depends on the product as well. Some products it doesn't make sense to, and also the buy-in. I can't speak for everyone, obviously, within the team, but from my perspective, the tests that we were writing in Java weren't to the same quality that we could achieve if we wrote those in JavaScript. So we started having some pair programming sessions, and we started having some sessions with QAs to learn JavaScript, and we just continued from there. And once everyone saw Cypress and started using Cypress, they understood why we're making that transition. Because from 0 to hero, Cypress is really great. Once you start getting into the really specifics of the cases that you want to run, then it's not the best tool for every job. But again, as I say, that's another chat for another time.
I've got a question as well. Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Oral question, but did switching to Cypress affect your cross-browser testing at all? Because as far as I'm aware, they support mostly Chrome. They've added Firefox recently, but back when we tried it, it was a bit iffy. But how did that affect you from that point of view, and what would you do if it was absolutely necessary that you did a lot of cross-browser testing? Would you just use Selenium then? Yes, absolutely. So our mentality from the start when we chose Cypress is a very, very good point, is that when we started adopting it, only supported Chrome, and so we would have most of our tests written in Cypress, but we would also have a subset of tests written either in Test Cafe at the time, or retain the Java suite, just a much condensed version to run our browser stack tests across browser. So yes, that's a very good point to mention, is that we couldn't solely abandon the cross-browser level. The argument we have from developers, and it makes perfect sense, is that we're using a React framework where we know the limitations and the compatibility across browsers. So we can be pretty confident that we are using the right tools within our React framework to support some of those other browsers like IE. But yeah, that's very much an ongoing conversation that we're having currently. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, comment about WebDriver IO, and I've used that, and I very much agree. It works really well as well. Yeah, I'm not trying to endorse one tool here. I'm just trying to endorse Cyprus because it got us to this point in time, which I think is a really, really key component. But yeah, absolutely, we could have got there with other tools. Cool. Any other questions? Cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if we've got no other questions, then I think that is been timed to the T, Lewis. 45 minutes on the dot. Thank you very much for that, Lewis. I'm sure everyone will join me in thanking Lewis for a really interesting talk. As I said before, this has been recorded, so if there's anything that you do want to go over, you want to check over the slides again, I'll be posting this to our YouTube page in the next couple of days. So yeah, looking forward to posting that. From here onwards, we've got another interactive roundtable, which will be posted in the next few days, week maybe. We've got 5 awesome speakers ready to go, so please do keep your eyes peeled on Quality Advocates and on my LinkedIn, and we'll be announcing the interactive roundtable shortly. But in the meantime, thank you everybody for attending. Great to have so many people come in their lunchtime, and once again, massive thank you to Lewis for joining us on Quality Advocates again. Looking forward to having him back at some stage soon. So thanks very much, Lewis, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.